When the PlayStation 2 launched in 2000, players were eager for the future of gaming. Sleek new hardware, jaw-dropping visuals, and the promise of bigger, more ambitious adventures than anything on the PlayStation before it. Among the racing games, fighters, and tech demos sat one of the very first RPGs on the system, Orphen, Scion of Sorcery, an anime tie-in that promised time travel, branching storylines, and flashy magic. On paper, it had all the makings of a hidden gem. But once you actually pick up the controller, you quickly realize why Orphen has been left behind in the history of JRPGs. Orphen, Scion of Sorcery, was released alongside the PlayStation 2 in North America and Europe on October 26, 2000. Developed by Shade Inc., who I don't really know of, and well, you probably don't know of either. At the time, Sorcerous Stabber Orphen was a recognizable brand. The light novels had been running in Japan since 1994, and the anime adaptation aired in the late 90s, eventually making its way overseas. So, for fans of the show, the idea of stepping into Orphen's shoes on brand new hardware must have been exciting. It was a chance to wield magic, to travel through time, to live out an adventure that felt straight out of an anime. But the reality? Well, let's just say Orphen's Scion of Sorcery represents not just an early experiment in the PS2 RPG design, but also the growing pains of developers adjusting to the new hardware, and the pitfalls of trying to stretch a licensed anime into a full-fledged video game. Orphen, Scion of Sorcery follows the main character by the name of, well, Orphen, a powerful but reckless sorcerer trained at the Tower of Fang, an elite academy for sorcerers. Alongside him are his disciple, Magic, or rather Magnus in the game, and Cleo, the blonde girl who becomes increasingly obnoxious the longer you play this game. The story drops Orphen and his companions into a voyage gone wrong. What starts as a boat trip quickly spirals into chaos when their ship is attacked, leaving the group stranded on the mysterious Chaos Island. From here, the narrative branches into 3 separate storylines, each focusing on different characters and conflicts. It's ambitious for an early PlayStation 2 RPG, giving players a reason to replay the game and see events unfold from multiple perspectives. And tying it all together is the idea of time travel, not just as a gimmick, but as a core part of the plot. Orphen and his allies leap between past and future versions of the island, using time itself as a tool to uncover secrets, overcome obstacles, and try to survive the strange power at work. Now, time travel isn't a particularly rare trope in JRPGs. In fact, some of the genre's most celebrated titles have built their entire identity around it. Chrono Trigger, for example, used time travel not just as a story hook, but as the backbone of its gameplay, letting you shape the fate of the world across multiple eras, with choices that rippled across centuries. Compared to these examples, Orphen, Scion of Sorcery, feels much smaller in scope. Its time travel is more of a narrative device than a true mechanic, a way to explain why the same location looks different between chapters, or why a puzzle suddenly has a solution. It adds flavor, sure, but it never reaches the potential that other JRPGs had already proven possible. At the time, critics weren't impressed. Orphen's Scion of Sorcery landed with middling scores across the board. Outlets like IGN and GameSpot called out its clunky combat, awkward pacing, and lack of depth. GamePro was one of the few to offer faint praise, highlighting its anime ties and branching story, but even that couldn't elevate it beyond decent at best. In the launch lineup that would soon be overshadowed by heavy hitters like Final Fantasy X and Kingdom Hearts, Orphen quickly faded into obscurity, remembered more as a curiosity than a classic. Looking back today, it stands as a relic of the PS2's growing pains. A game with big ideas, flashy promises, and just enough novelty to spark nostalgia, but not enough polish to be remembered as anything more than an early misstep into the console's massive library. So with all that context out of the way, let's get into Orphen, Scion of Sorcery itself, and why it ended up being forgotten. The game starts off with an animated scene, which is quite peculiar. Anyways, I figure I'd just show the anime scenes since this game's identity is much of an anime itself.
I love this town, don't you?
Yeah.
Let's see. We should be pretty close.
Hey, you good-for-nothing sorcerer!
Huh?
Ow! Oh, gee! Ow!
Poor guys.
Come on. Hold it right there! Huh?
Wow, they're already standing up.
I think they're becoming immune.
I want to pay off my debt. You're gonna have to come with me, though, and whatever's left over is gonna be mine.
Vulcan, what are you talking about?
I'm all ears, guys.
After a quick introduction to the main cast, we find Orphen and his gang aboard a ship. Thanks to Vulcan's incompetence, they've ended up on the wrong vessel. Magnus and Cleo immediately start bickering, setting the tone for their relationship throughout the game. But their squabble is cut short when monsters suddenly attack, forcing them to run straight to Orphen for help. What follows is a chaotic escape sequence as the ship begins to sink, slowly filling with water while the group scrambles to survive. Along the way, we're introduced to a few of the other characters who will play a role in this adventure, including a hulking musclehead fending off giant insects, and an elegant pink-haired woman making a dramatic entrance by climbing a rope to safety. And then, just as the panic builds, Orphen is dragged into his very first battle, against none other than a gigantic crab. The game just tosses you straight into battle, and it's the first bad decision it makes. Your very first fight is against a massive crab that smashes its way into the ship's hull. On the surface, the combat looks interesting, but it's clunky and not very intuitive. After a handful of fights, you'll start to get the hang of it, but the developers really could have done a better job explaining how anything actually works. In battle, Orphen does most of the heavy lifting while his allies, if you can even call them that, are basically there to take hits for you. Combat isn't turn-based like a typical JRPG, but I wouldn't really call it action either. It's somewhere in the middle with sloppy controls and enemies that swarm you at random. So most fights feel less like strategy and more like frantic button mashing. Each enemy, or even objects like healing crystals, gets its own target marker. You can swap between them with the analog stick, which then shows you details like HP, names, and elemental weaknesses. Elements cover the usual spread like fire, ice, wind, lightning, and dark. Orphen's spells slot neatly into those categories, like Hand of Pyro for fire, and Bite of Lightning for, well, lightning. Spells are divided into projectiles, defensive shields, and bigger elemental abilities. Holding down a spell charges it, and if you charge it long enough, you can even summon a giant spirit to smack your foes around, or increase the number of projectiles of a spell. Orphen also shouts out these edgy one-liners during these casts too.
The bite of lightning! The hand of pyro!
I love those moments. The problem is that you're constantly interrupted mid-cast, which kills the fun. Orphen can also block using the square button, which is supposed to nullify incoming damage, but the system has lag built in. Some spells leave you stuck in place longer than others, so even if you want to defend, you can get caught in an animation and punished hard. Then there's the camera. It whips around trying to be cinematic, but half the time you're staring at a wall or fighting enemies that you can't even see. Pair that with the game's weird decision to use crystals instead of HP bars, and it's even more frustrating. Crystals only break at certain percentages, 80, 60, 40, and so on, so you really never know how close you are to finishing a fight. Against bosses, this is especially annoying, since it can feel like you're just hammering away with no feedback until a crystal shatters. The longer you play, the more tedious combat becomes. Monsters constantly knock you out of casts, grab you, throw you to the ground, and then repeat it again and again while your allies just stand there like statues. Flying enemies zip around at ridiculous speed, spamming projectiles that are almost impossible to dodge. Eventually, I gave up trying to play properly and just stuck to melee attacks. They chain into 3-hit combos, deal decent damage, and auto-run Orphen into enemies, which also helps dodge incoming fire. It's not flashy, but it's effective, and it was the only way I could tolerate combat by the end. Overall, combat in Orphen Scion of Sorcery is weird, experimental, and I could almost see it working if it had more time in the oven. But as it stands, it's one of the worst battle systems that I've ever played. Anyways, I basically just started smashing buttons to kill the crab because at this point in the game, I was still pretty confused. With the hand of Pyro and the bite of lightning, Orphen eventually takes it down, but not before it spawns what feels like hundreds of baby crabs. I'm pretty sure every single one of those babies counts as its own separate enemy. You'll see this trick throughout the rest of the game, where one mob actually counts as multiple enemies, and the best way to handle them is with elemental spells like Bite of Lightning for its AoE effect. Not long after, we're met with a choice: follow Cleo or Magnus. Honestly, it doesn't feel like it matters who you pick. Either way, you'll head outside and run into Magnus and Sephi, the pink-haired woman we saw earlier. She joins the party just in time for the ship to get attacked by a massive electric leviathan. Orphen takes it upon himself to deal with the threat and climbs up onto the ship's masses to fight it off. This fight is where you start to actually understand the basics of combat. The system plays a little like rock, paper, scissors. You defend when the enemy attacks, and you strike when they're open. Attacks are usually very telegraphed, so blocking is easy enough, but the whole rhythm feels weirdly slow. Sometimes it even feels slower than a turn-based system, which is impressive in the worst way. Instead of rewarding quick reactions to attack patterns, combat just turns into a test of patience, slowly whittling enemies down. Later, bosses crank this up even further, dragging fights on for 10 to 15 minutes, and if you wipe, you're forced to slog through it all over again. After beating the Leviathan, you're rewarded with a short, cheesy cutscene where Orphen unlocks a new spell, the Bolt of Thunder. This happens after every boss fight, and honestly, it's one of the better mechanics in the game since it at least gives you something tangible to look forward to. The boat doesn't survive the fight though. It breaks in half and sinks, leading into another anime cutscene, this one of a mysterious woman in pain, or something along those lines. Eventually, Orphen, Magnus, and Sephi wash up on land. It's not the best introduction since the screen constantly flashes with annoying lightning, but Magnus quickly reveals that Sephi believes they've landed on Chaos Island. Orphen curses Vulcan for this screw up, and with that, we're finally given full control of him again to actually explore the game. The controls in Orphen, Scion of Sorcery look simple enough on the surface. You move with the left analog stick, rotate the camera with L1 and R1, jump with square, interact with X, and attack with circle for melee or triangle for ranged magic. On paper, it sounds like a pretty standard setup. There are even extra features like pressing R3 to enter a first-person view, though I never once found a reason to use it, or tapping down on the D-pad to bring up a menu where you can swap spells or use items. The catch? The game never explains any of this. For hours, I had no clue you could even switch spells, despite constantly unlocking new ones after every boss fight. The same goes for items. You'll collect an endless supply of potions and consumables from treasure chests, but without knowing how to actually use them. They just sit there in your inventory, completely wasted. That's not a minor oversight, it's a massive failure in design. Basic mechanics that should have been clear from the start are left for the player to stumble onto by accident. Even once you do figure things out, the controls aren't exactly smooth. Movement is fine, but jumping feels way too floaty, which makes platforming sections more frustrating than fun. The melee attack and basic projectile spell, almost useless. I can count on one hand the number of times I actually felt like they mattered across the entire game. To its credit, the camera is a step up compared to the last two launch titles, Evergrace and Eternal Ring. At least here you get manual control, though only horizontally. The downside is that the camera sensitivity is absurd. It accelerates so quickly, it's like trying to drive a car with a gas pedal that twitches at the slightest touch. Eventually, you adapt. but not before plenty of awkward corrections and overcorrections make the first stretch of the game feel clumsy. To find shelter, control suddenly shifts over to Sephi, and this happens a lot in the game. You'll often swap between characters for short sequences, usually solo battles or traversal sections. Sephi's first task is to climb up some vines, which is about as annoying as it sounds. And then she's thrown into her first fight. These solo battles are sprinkled throughout the game, but they're usually much easier than the ones Orphen faces. Afterwards, Sephi lowers a drawbridge so Orphen and Magnus can join her. And here we get her backstory. She explains that she used to be a professional dancer, and that she came to Chaos Island to pay respects at her fiance's grave. She asks for help reaching it, and Orphen, ever motivated by money, agrees to assist. From there, the group pushes deeper into the island and quickly runs into the first platforming section, where Orphen once again separates from the others to tackle it alone. In Orphen, Scion of Sorcery, you take control of Orphen and his band of companions, Cleo, Magnus, and a handful of unlucky passengers as they're dragged into a bizarre adventure on the mysterious Chaos Island. The game splits itself into two main layers, exploration and combat. Exploration takes place in a fully 3D environment where you guide the party through levels packed with traps, puzzles, and occasional platforming challenges. What you're doing varies depending on the story branch that you've chosen, but the structure stays the same. Push forward, solve the obstacle, and move deeper into the island. Along the way, enemies pop up as either scripted encounters or obstacles littered across the path, forcing you into battles that break up the traversal. The thing that's supposed to set up Orphen apart is its use of time travel as a central mechanic. Chaos Island isn't just a place you explore, but one that shifts across different eras. You might leap forward into winter so a frozen lake turns into a walkable bridge, or rewind time to restore a collapsed ruin back to its original state. On paper, it's a really clever hook, one that ties itself directly into progression and makes it feel like you're bending not just space, but time itself. That sounds exciting, right? An island with multiple versions of itself, switching between watery caverns, frozen cliffs, and gloomy dungeon-like mazes. But in practice, the level design is painfully linear. Every stage boils down to a straight corridor from beginning to end, with almost no freedom to poke around or uncover secrets. Worse still, the game flat out prevents backtracking. Try to turn around and Magnus or another party member will literally stop you, telling you you're going the wrong way. For a place meant to be mysterious and otherworldly, Chaos Island ends up feeling more like a guided tour than an actual world to explore. The game does dangle treasure chests as an incentive, but most of them hold consumables that you'll probably never use. A few contain extra weapons for your allies, but those are rare enough that hunting for them feels like a chore than a reward. Something as simple as color-coded chests, red for consumables, blue for equipment, could have gone a long way in making exploration feel more worthwhile. When you put it all together, Orphen feels a lot less like a JRPG and a lot more like a clunky platformer. You'll spend most of your time running, jumping, and solving primitive puzzles rather than actually fighting battles or diving into the story. For a game that sells itself on flashy magic duels and anime spectacle, the level design leaves the whole adventure feeling strangely hollow. The puzzles in Orphen's Scion of Sorcery are, for the most part, underwhelming. Most boil down to floaty jumping challenges or simple lever pulls. To be fair, some of them can be fun, but the imprecise jump physics really drag the experience down. That said, I do appreciate one small mercy. When you inevitably tumble into a bottomless pit, Orphen just respawns with a chunk of health missing, instead of throwing you back to a game over screen like Evergrace. Nearly every level throws puzzles at you, and while there is a bit more variety than I initially remembered, that doesn't make them any less primitive. Swinging axes, crushing blocks, spike traps, all the hallmarks of a dungeon crawl. At times it felt less like I was a sorcerer unraveling an island secret, and more like I was Indiana Jones trying not to get flattened. The traps can also be downright brutal, sometimes chopping your health bar in half and hitting you again before you can even recover. To top it off, the game constantly forces Orphen to split from the party for these sequences every time he announces the exact same line about leaving his companions behind.
I'll go on ahead. You two catch up later. I'll go on ahead. You two catch up later. I'll go on ahead. You two can catch up later.
It's hard not to laugh when you hear it the 10th time. It's one of those little quirks that makes the game's design feel constrained, but also accidentally kind of charming. After trudging through yet another round of platforming and puzzles, the party finally stumbles on a glowing fragment. Sephi immediately recognizes it as part of the fabled crystal egg, an artifact said to control the flow of time itself. She learned all this from her fiancé Rufus, and somehow pieces together that the group has actually been transported into the future. When Sephi touches the fragment, the whole party is whisked through time again. Stepping outside, the landscape has completely changed. They soon encounter the Keaton tree, or maybe it's the Kirin tree, and apparently this thing only blooms once every 1,000 years, and strangely enough, smells like chocolate. Either way, it's supposed to be proof that they've jumped eras. Not long after, Orphen triggers another crystal egg fragment, and you guessed it, they're tossed through time again. This time, it's a frozen wasteland. Cue the dreaded ice physics. Platforming becomes a headache, with slippery terrain and icicles blocking paths. Worse, the game's collision detection is so janky, you can literally get stuck inside the icicles, forced to just sit there and wait to die. It's tedious and highlights just how clunky movement feels in this game. To be fair, the music in this section is one of the better tracks, so at least your ears get rewarded while your patience is tested. Once again, the party steps on another crystal fragment, and surprise, surprise, they're thrown through time. This happens a lot, and by now it's clear that time travel isn't just a gimmick. It's the main thread tying the whole adventure together. Each jump lets Orphen and the gang access new areas of Chaos Island by shifting through different eras. Eventually, Sephi reaches the blooming Kirin tree. Since the tree only blossoms once every 1,000 years, it's proof that they've looped back to their own time. In the middle of all this, Magnus casually asks Sephi about Rufus, and she flips a question back on him about girlfriends. His answer? He's too busy training.
Magnus, do you have a girlfriend?
Me? No, well, you know, I'm busy with training and stuff.
Sure, Magnus, sure. From there, Orphen faces a strange riddle he can't solve, until the ever-annoying Vulcan and his little brother Dorton show up again. I genuinely have no idea if Vulcan is supposed to be a grown man or a bratty kid, but he's constantly positioned as Orphen's comic rival. This encounter turns into a slapstick minigame where Orphen tries to climb up while Vulcan pelts him up from above.
Hey, put me down! Let me go, you money!
Dorton eventually gives Orphen the riddle's answer, a mirror, hoping that he won't get launched like his brother, but Orphen launches him anyways. With the riddle solved, the group delve deeper into Chaos Island, into a dungeon that's dark, cramped, and filled with traps. And the camera? Absolutely miserable here. It clips through walls constantly, showing you geometry you're not supposed to see, and making the game look rougher than it already does. Then comes the first major boss fight, and it's a nightmare. A towering, black, horned minotaur. Unlike previous fights, your spells don't work. You're forced to use only your sword. The gimmick is simple. Fend him off before he shoves you off the ledge to your death. His moves alternate between charging at you and belching flames when his health dips lower. The problem is that melee timing is painfully clunky. You think you've landed the right swing to interrupt his charge, but the game says otherwise, and suddenly you're face first in the dirt. Fail a few times and the frustration builds fast. This fight is more mentally exhausting than it is mechanically difficult. You just want it to be over because redoing it feels like punishment. I finally scraped through on my third try, mostly by spamming sword swings and praying I'd catch him mid-charge. You're rewarded with another animated cutscene where Orphen starts eyeing Sephi with a bit more suspicion.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
Look out!
I knew that I was right about this place.
Is that all you have to say?
Magnus! Are you all right?
Yeah?
The gang enters Gaia's tomb, which is essentially the resting or midpoint spot of the game. It's also here where they reunite with the rest of the cast. Cleo comes screaming at them and already lecturing them about leaving her alone. Sephi leaves by herself, stating that she thinks it's time she goes off by herself. It's here where Orphen is introduced to the other characters, one being Amar, the little kid that's looking for his mother, and then there's Zeus, the big man who seems to be looking for his daughter on Chaos Island. These introductions make Gaia's tomb feel more like a narrative checkpoint, the story pressing pause for everyone to reset before things escalate further. We're given a jump scare by this weird creepy old lady creeping around in the background as Orphen and Cleo converse. Eventually, her blue dog or cat or fox catches onto the old hag. She states that we're working with a woman and runs off. Orphen allows Sephi to rejoin his group once more and continue their search for Rufus's grave. They fall down as the floor beneath them crumbles, and it seems that they've been caught and locked up by the old hag from earlier. She believes that Sephi is a servant of Kyrus and asks what she's done to her granddaughter. They find their way out eventually and catch up with Cleo walking alongside the old hag from earlier. It seems that Cleo has cleared up their misunderstanding somehow. From here, the group finds themselves in the underground labyrinth, which, you guessed it, tight quarters and tons of traps once more. This section highlights both the strengths and weaknesses of Orphen's level design, swinging axes that can take off half your health, and claustrophobic rooms that really lean into the trap dungeon vibe. The group eventually hears a scream, to which Sephi runs towards and saves a little girl. The girl turns out to be the granddaughter of the old hag from earlier, Ronnie. Ronnie reveals that Kyrus used her in experiments, causing her to age faster than normal people would. She's only 10 years old, but looks much older.
She definitely looks older than 10. Look at that body.
Master!
Ronnie is soon reunited with her grandmother as Cleo arrives with the old hag, Jado. Jado reveals that Kyrus is trying to find eternal youth and apologizes to Sephi for mistaking her as a bad person. Kyrus fears getting old and losing her beauty, and has been conducting experiments to stop the aging process. Here's where the lore connects back to the crystal egg. Jado explains that the artifact, capable of manipulating the flow of time, can potentially cure Ronnie's condition. The catch is that the crystal egg is supposedly hidden in the underground temple. Magnus, ever the instigator, basically gaslights Orphen into helping Sephi with the mission to obtain the crystal egg. So, the group delves even further into Chaos Island. The group eventually comes across a sealed wall deep in the underground temple. With no way in, Sephi begins chanting and, to Orphen's surprise, magically phases through the wall. Inside, the chamber is brimming with treasure, and at the center of it all, the long-awaited crystal egg. But just as they grab the artifact, they're ambushed by skeletons. Thankfully, these enemies are pushovers compared to the gauntlet of traps and bosses faced earlier, and Orphen's crew cuts them down with ease. Finally, Orphen gets his hand on the crystal egg, yet Sephi's insistence of wanting the crystal egg raises some red flags for him. Before the tension between them escalates, they're interrupted by none other than Kyrus, who swoops in and steals the egg away. Orphen manages to land a hand of pyro at the last moment, blasting Kyrus along with the artifact, but in the chaos, the crystal egg shatters into fragments once again. It's then revealed that Sephi's true intention all along was to use the egg to bring Rufus back to life.
I was close. So close.
Sephi,
Yes?
why did you really come to the island? Dancers don't dance the way you do, Sephi. Tell me.
Sephi?
I came to this island in search of a miracle. A miracle that would bring my true love back to life.
To life?
I wanted to use the egg to be with him again.
Trying to bring him back to life, huh?
Is that possible?
She had been training herself before even setting foot on Chaos Island, using Orphen and Magnus to reach this very moment. Magnus proposes a new plan: gather the other crystal egg fragments to travel into a time period where the egg is still whole. The gamble works. The group succeeds in traversing back to an era when the artifact was unbroken. Returning with the intact egg, they encounter a mysterious old man who clearly recognizes Sephi. The shocking twist? The man is Rufus, her fiancé. The revelation is so overwhelming that Sephi faints on the spot. But the drama doesn't end there. Cyrus once again steals the crystal egg, and it's revealed that Rufus suffers from the same accelerated aging condition as Ronnie. Manipulated by Cyrus and blinded by his own obsession with the truth of the egg, Rufus wasted his youth and now regrets everything. This sets the stage for the next major boss fight, a creature resembling the Leviathan from earlier, but with a more frustrating design. It flies in circles around Orphen, cloaked in protective bubbles that make it completely immune to damage. To dispel the bubbles, you're forced to target and destroy floating debris scattered around the arena. In practice, this fight is less about strategy and more about wrestling with the game's systems. The camera constantly works against you, making it nearly impossible to see what debris you're targeting. Projectile spells are widely inaccurate, forcing you into the role of a button masher, spamming attacks in hope of landing a hit. On paper, it's a boss designed to test your precision and timing, but in execution, it's a perfect showcase of how tedious and unrefined the combat system becomes. At best, it's annoying. At worst, it's just boring. After finally bringing the beast down, Cyrus flees once more, abandoning the crystal egg. The group takes it back to Ronnie, whose condition worsens by the minute. Jado, now desperate, finally holds the crystal egg, but admits that she has no idea on how to use it. In her place, Rufus steps forward, offering to break the spellcast on Ronnie. As someone who has studied the egg extensively and suffered the consequences, he volunteers to undo what Cyrus has wrought. This part deserved a full-blown animated cutscene, but instead we get a bare-bones in-engine moment that feels painfully underwhelming.
I am ready to begin.
Rufus.
Sephi, I'm glad I got to see you one more time.
But Rufus...
Guardian of Time, I demand, guide us to the true path!
Look! The egg!
What the...
Sorcery? No, it's something different.
Oh, Ronnie!
He did it!
Rufus chooses not to cure himself and secure a happy ending, but instead sacrifices his life for the greater good. It's his way of atoning for the sins of Cyrus and the damage her obsession had caused. In his final moments, Rufus tells Sephi that he loves her before passing away. The game then cuts to Orphen, Cleo, and Magnus back aboard the ship. Sephi decides to remain behind on Chaos Island, tending to Rufus's grave. Before they part ways, she gives Orphen a small memento, and just like that, her journey comes to an end. But instead of rolling credits, the game throws a curveball. We cut to Ronnie, who ominously states that she has been waiting for Orphen, forever imprisoned on Chaos Island by the chains of eternity. It's a haunting note to end on, and then she presents the player with a choice: play again to fulfill your true destiny, or walk away. If you choose to decline, you're met with a painfully anticlimactic bad ending that bluntly states how the world will never know the dark truth of Chaos Island. It's an ending so limp, it almost feels like punishment for quitting early. That's because the game isn't truly finished. Orphen, Scion of Sorcery is split into 3 separate branches, each one tied to a different companion: Sephi, Zeus, and Mar. Only by completing all 3 paths, experiencing their personal stories and reasons for being on Chaos Island, do you fully unlock the full picture and reveal the true ending. Orphen finds himself back on the ship, struck by a strange sense of deja vu. He has no memory of helping Sephi, only a faint, lingering feeling that something like that might have happened. This time, instead of Sephi, Zeus joins Orphen's group, sending us off on his storyline. That means fighting the annoying lightning sea leviathan once more, watching the ship snap in half again, and waking up stranded on Chaos Island once more. Zeus's backstory is straightforward but heavier than Sephi's. 10 years ago, his wife left him, taking their daughter with her. His wife has since passed away, and Zeus has come to Chaos Island in hopes of reuniting with his daughter. His combat style reflects his brute personality, switching between a bow for long range attacks, a flail, and a sword for melee. He's not the worst companion. Watching him fire an arrow is pretty cool. From here, the group delves deeper into the island. Zeus occasionally shows off his brute strength to help progress, and there are more puzzles along the way, but at this point it's par for the course. Compared to Sephi's story, Zeus's branch is less mechanically tied to the game's core systems, so there's less to dwell on. The first big narrative beat comes from when they reach a graveyard of ships. Among them, one that looks suspiciously like the very same one that they came on. This implies that they've once again been transported into the future. Soon after, they find themselves in the literal graveyard, where Zeus believes he sees his daughter. It turns out to be true, but not in the way he hoped. They find her tomb. On it lies a letter, a broken pendant, and a fragment of the crystal egg. The letter, strangely addressed to Zeus, explains that the fragment belongs to the legendary artifact capable of manipulating time, and even tells them how to use it. With this knowledge, Orphen is able to transport them back to their own time. And then comes the Spider Nest, home to the most obnoxious boss in the game, and quite possibly in my entire JRPG career. The fight begins with Orphen fending off two worms that endlessly spew baby spiders. It's easy enough, but once the giant spider shows up, the game's already fragile combat system collapses in on itself. The boss shields itself behind 3 layers of webs, which Orphen has to chip away at while simultaneously defending. The spider alternates between firing off 6-hit web combos, often in near invisible patterns that inflict an ailment preventing you from guarding, or unleashing what I can only call an ass blast of scorching fire from its rear. Here's where the mechanics really break down. Orphen's shield only blocks about 3 web shots before depleting, forcing you to drop and re-raise it repeatedly to recharge. Even when you do manage to break through all 3 web layers, you often get barely a window to land any damage before the spider throws them up again. The fight becomes an exercise in attrition, long, tedious, inconsistent, and completely disrespectful of your time. It's not difficult in the traditional sense, it's just bad boss design, and by the end of it, I wasn't just frustrated with this battle, I was outright hating the combat system itself. Orphen, Scion of Sorcery isn't difficult in the traditional sense. You're not really contending with deep mechanics or punishing enemies. The challenge comes from its progression system. Saving is restricted to static checkpoints, and they're the only opportunities to lock in your progress. This design choice makes the pacing feel rigid and unforgiving. If you run into a tedious gimmicky boss fight, or stumble through one of the game's trap-filled corridors, where traps can stun lock you and drain half your health in seconds, you're sent all the way back to the last checkpoint. Sometimes that means losing a huge chunk of progress, not because you lacked skill, but because of small mistakes, clunky movement, or bad camera angles. Instead of ratcheting up tension, the system drags everything into frustrating slogs. You end up replaying the same short sections again and again, not because they're fun, but because you have no choice. It's the kind of design decision that really makes you appreciate autosaves and manual saves in modern games. Here, the world doesn't feel like an adventure, it feels much more like a grind. The combat doesn't help either. I never really enjoyed the system to begin with, so boss fights quickly turned into slogs. I appreciated the idea of reading enemy patterns, timing blocks, and finding openings, but in practice, the clunky controls and limited moveset made most encounters feel dull. Too many bosses boiled down to damage sponges with repetitive attack cycles. Worse, a handful of them leaned on gimmicks that highlighted how stiff the mechanics really are. And of course, if you died, back to the checkpoint, back to the same traps, back to the same dull gauntlet. Boss fights didn't feel like rewarding climaxes, they felt like chores you just wanted to get over with. After spending nearly 45 minutes grinding through the boss, Orphen finally brings it down and the party can move forward.
My daughter is gone. I've come too late.
Hey, I'm trying to eat here. Can you be depressed someplace else, okay? Ah!
How can you be Zeus, come on, cheer up. We don't even know for sure if it was her grave.
Even if it was her grave, we were in the future. Now that we're back, chances are she's still alive. So just stop your whining, Zeus, okay?
He isn't whining, Orphen. He's just really... Oh.
You want to find your daughter? We want to get off this wacky island. Look, you scratch our back and we'll scratch yours. Don't worry, we'll get out of this one way or another.
The group soon encounters Jado and Kiris. Jado orders them to quickly grab the crystal egg while Kiris makes her escape. In the exchange, Jado recognizes Zeus as Azel's father, dropping the bombshell that Kiris has kidnapped Azel in the name of her twisted science. Not long after, Orphen reunites with the rest of the party. Magnus introduces them to Rani, who offers guidance and leads them into the tunnels in pursuit of Kiris. A short boat ride later, they arrive at a sprawling maze, eventually navigating their way into a laboratory. There, they learn the disturbing truth. Kiris has been conducting experiments on young girls, with at least one managing to escape. The party then encounters who they assume is Kiris, only to fall into her trap. They're sent plunging into the darkness below, where the game throws them into one of the strangest encounters yet, the doppelganger boss fight. This battle was both gimmicky and frustrating. The doppelganger mirrors Orphen and his allies, transforming into party members during combat. Every time I landed a hit, the damage reflected back onto whichever character it had copied. That meant I was essentially killing Magnus and Zeus myself, before the boss inevitably took Orphen's form and turned my attacks against me. I must have attempted this fight at least 5 or 6 times, racking my brain for a strategy. The solution came when I remembered one of Orphen's earlier spells.
The armor of purity!
The armor of purity reflects darkness attacks back to all enemies.
Using this, I finally forced the doppelganger back into its true form, a simple lizard man. Once exposed, the fight was trivial compared to the frustrating gauntlet leading up to it. In the aftermath, Zeus seized with rage, furious that Kiris managed to slip away yet again.
Going alone. Have to get her back.
Shield of fire!
Huh?
And that's why you can't afford to lose your cool.
While we're at it, the anime cutscenes in Orphen's Scion of Sorcery are easily one of its highlights. They're highly reminiscent of early to mid-90s anime, with the slightly rough but charming hand-drawn aesthetic that gives them a nostalgic feel. These scenes add a layer of personality and flair that most early PS2 launch titles didn't even attempt, making it clear that the developers wanted to lean into the identity of the series rather than just churn out a generic fantasy RPG. They're used sparingly, reserved only for key story beats, which makes them feel special when they do appear. And while they don't cover the entire narrative, their presence goes a long way in elevating the overall presentation. The fact that you can replay them from the title screen is a thoughtful addition. Where the anime cutscenes shine, the in-game models fall short. Character models are blocky, under-detailed, and often stiff in motion. Animations can feel awkward. Orphen's little victory pose after a boss fight is unintentionally hilarious, but that clunkiness ends up becoming part of the game's charm. It's rough, yes, but it aligns with the comedic banter and the over-the-top interactions between the characters. reminding you not to take the game too seriously. In a way, the art direction works because of its awkwardness. It fits the game's strange in-between tone, half serious, half self-aware comedy. The visuals might not impress compared to later PS2 titles, but they carve out a goofy, almost endearing identity that keeps the presentation from being entirely forgettable. For the first time in these PS2 launch titles, I can actually say something positive about the voice acting. It's not flawless, but the cast really commits to the roles. Cleo spends half the game nagging at Orphen, Magnus plays the rather innocent, whining little brother, and Orphen himself perfectly embodies that cocky, flamboyant, sorcerer energy that the story needs. What genuinely surprised me though was just how star-studded this cast is. Orphen is voiced by Quinton Flynn, who you might recognize as Raiden from Metal Gear Solid, Axel from Kingdom Hearts, or Jin from League of Legends. He even shows up again in the PS2 library as Karg in Arc the Lad Twilight of the Spirits. It's a shameless plug, but I just really love that game. Cleo is voiced by none other than Jennifer Hale. I could just say Commander Shepard from Mass Effect and leave it at that. And then there's Tara Strong as Marv, who brings the same energy she gave to Riku in Final Fantasy X, Timmy Turner in The Fairly Odd Parents, Raven in Teen Titans, and the list really does go on. In many ways, it's the voice acting and character interactions that hold Orphen's Scion of Sorcery together. The gameplay may stumble with clunky mechanics and questionable design choices, but hearing this cast bounce off one another adds a surprising amount of charm. Orphen's cocky banter, Cleo's constant nagging, which yes, can get grating, and Magnus's bratty outbursts all come together to create a chemistry that feels ripped straight from an anime.
Well, Orphen's actually helping out a stranger. That's a first.
Master's only doing it because she's going to pay. Ow!
Yeah, well, you know me. Always helping out those in need.
Yeah, right. Hey, I'm risking my life here. This place is crawling with monsters. What would happen if one found me?
He'd turn to stone.
What was that?
Nothing.
Get this off me!
It's only a spider web.
I am not spider food!
They only eat sweet girls.
I don't feel sad when I'm playing it.
So, you're an orphan too, huh?
Huh? You too?
Yeah. There's two of me. Okay, come on, guys, now. Easy.
Prepare yourself, Orphen.
No, wait!
Yeah.
Morphin! Is that you, Orphen?
Shut up.
Oh, don't you ever put your foot on me again, or I'll unleash Dorton the Pulverizer on you!
Pulverizer.
Yeah. Well...
And that's the strange magic of it. The game may not play like the anime, but it definitely sounds like one. And that energy is what sells the experience more than anything else. The gang eventually catches up with Kiris once again after a short breather. This time, Ronnie steps in to defend her, and then drops the bombshell that she's actually Azel, Zeus's daughter. At this point, I was completely lost. Wasn't Azel Kiris back in the first playthrough? Are we suddenly in a different timeline where identities shift around? The game never really clears that up, and it left me scratching my head. Ronnie explains that she and Azel were the two young girls who were kidnapped and experimented on years ago. The failed experiment cursed Azel to age 7 times faster, while Ronnie was the one who managed to escape. Father and daughter are briefly reunited, but it doesn't last long. That's when Jado, the true villain of this timeline, shows up, steals the crystal egg, and declares that she'll take Chaos Island to the grave. Her plan? Toss the egg into a volcano and sink the entire island. Jado then makes a very casual escape and gets away. The party chases her up to the volcano's peak, where Jado summons what I can only describe as a lava-dwelling octopus snail crustacean monster. It serves as Zeus's final boss, but honestly it's pretty underwhelming. The creature's main shell is too tough for Orphen's magic to break through, so Zeus has to step in to slice it open, giving Orphen a weak point to target. The monster regenerates with protective arms, but the fight is easily cheesed with melee attacks. Dodge the oncoming swipes, land some heavy hits, and repeat. Compared to the nightmare that was a spider boss, this one felt like a cakewalk. With the monster defeated, Ronnie uses the crystal egg to restore Azel to her true form. She and Zeus finally get their reunion, and his story arc closes on a surprisingly wholesome note. It's the exact opposite of Sephi's bittersweet ending. A weak story overall, sure, but at least one that lands on a heartfelt payoff. The game then cuts back to the ship, where Zeus entrusts his orphan with his memento, a golden arrow, passed down through his family. The screen fades to black, and once again, Ronnie appears, asking Orphen if he wants to replay the game to fulfill his true destiny. For the third and final story branch, Orphen once again finds himself back at the ship, reliving the same events like a deja vu of a deja vu. The Lightning Leviathan returns for yet another round. The ship snaps in half once more. And Orphen washes ashore on Chaos Island. Cleo wastes no time berating him. Some things never change. Until a mysterious melody drifts through the air. On their way towards the sound, Cleo accidentally steps on a crystal egg fragment, which unexpectedly pulls her through time. Because it's a new cycle, none of the characters remember the previous time travel shenanigans, so the whole mechanic is treated like a brand new revelation. At this point, it's starting to feel a little stale. Another reset, another whoops, time travel exists. Eventually, Cleo meets up with Mar, who explains his personal goal on Chaos Island. He's been chasing this very same melody, the only memory he has of his mother. He believes following it will lead him to the truth about her. The party reunites with Orphen and continues onward into the watercourse labyrinth, where they once again hear the enchanting melody. The source is eventually revealed, a massive mechanical organ powered by flowing water. It's an impressive sight, but the moment doesn't last. They're ambushed, and in that chaos, falling rocks destroy the organ. This in turn triggers a massive earthquake that shakes the island itself. On a side note, this melody is easily one of the standout tracks in the game, along with the Ice Zone theme from Sephi's storyline. It's one of the few truly memorable pieces of the soundtrack. The soundtrack of Orphen's Scion of Sorcery sits squarely in the middle of the PS2 launch era pack. Not bad, but not groundbreaking either. Some tracks are genuinely solid, while others just fade into the background. What the music does manage to do is establish atmosphere. The score helps to sell Chaos Island as a strange, otherworldly place, adding just enough mystique to make exploration feel alive. When paired with the game's voice acting though, the soundtrack often dips into pure cheese. A booming, triumphant track kicks in while a narrator solemnly proclaims the spell's name and power.
The feathers of the hurricane!
The feathers of the hurricane. Wind. Charge up to increase the number of projectiles.
It's goofy, sure, but it fits the game's oddball anime-inspired tone. Those awkward, over-the-top touches are part of what gives Orphen its identity. Most tracks lean toward mysterious ambience, which makes sense given the island's cryptic lore and shifting timelines. Emotional themes hit at the right moments, and the exploration tracks can be surprisingly enchanting. The boss battle theme also stands out, if only because of how well it pairs with Orphen himself. Hearing him shout over swelling orchestration never stops being entertaining, no matter how many times you hear it. The true standout, though, is the melody tied to Mar's storyline. It recurs in multiple forms, from Mar's delicate flute to the booming church organ to the bizarre mechanical water organ hidden deep within the labyrinth. Each version changes the mood, but the melody remains constant, weaving itself into Mar's character arc and giving his route a stronger emotional hook. By the end, it's stuck in your head for all the right reasons. Orphen's Scion of Sorcery's soundtrack may not stand among the legendary JRPG soundscapes, but it gives the game just enough personality to stand out. Sometimes moody, sometimes cheesy, but always unmistakably Orphen. The melody resurfaces once more, enchanting Mar all over again and pulling the party forward. Following the sound, they reunite with the rest of the cast, including Vulcan and Zorton, and set their sights on the mysterious tower where the music is coming from. The problem? They need a boat to cross the water. Vulcan, ever the know-it-all, points out that with the crystal egg's power, they can simply time travel to a point where the sea has frozen in winter. With no better options, the group sets off to gather fragments and make the crossing possible. Sure enough, after jumping through multiple time periods, they come across another fragment and find themselves face to face with their next boss, a winged beast. This fight is straightforward compared to some of the game's more frustrating encounters. The monster periodically lands, giving Orphen a window to strike. Guessing its landing spot correctly means you get some free hits in. Guess wrong and you're left on the defensive. Between landings, the creature peppers you with constant wind barrages from above, like an aerial bombardment. It's more of a patience check than a real challenge. Definitely one of the easier boss fights in the game. With the creature slain, the party then secures the crystal egg and returns to Vulcan for guidance.
You look so happy.
I am. And it's all thanks to you and Orphen.
That's right, Mar. I don't know about Cleo, but you do owe me. Big time.
Wait a minute! Just what is that supposed to mean, huh?
Ah! Why am I always surrounded by the most annoying brats in the universe?
Hey, no fighting!
Again?
What?
From over there!
I want to go to that tower. Yes, I must go to that tower.
Naturally, things go sideways. Orphen and Vulcan squabble over the artifact, which accidentally triggers its power, transporting everyone through time once again. Their next hurdle is a music puzzle, and let me just say, I hate these puzzles. You're forced to recreate the melody you've been hearing throughout the quest. That said, Mars' route does shake up the formula. Instead of endless trap corridors, the focus here is on interactive puzzles, which is a welcome change of pace. At the top, the gang finally confronts Jado, who reveals that she's not a villain this time around. Instead, she's been trying to maintain the island's fragile balance. She explains that the demon beneath Chaos Island is the true cause of the constant earthquakes, and the melody is the only thing keeping it asleep. The mechanical organ from earlier was her invention, an automated safeguard to ensure the song never stopped. But now that it's broken, the responsibility falls to someone else. The group presses on to the second tower, where they find Ronnie at the organ, desperately playing the melody to hold back the demon. In this storyline, Jado is revealed to be Karis' mother, and Ronnie is Karis' daughter. Neither of them antagonists this time, but guardians bound by duty. Ronnie has been playing the song non-stop to fulfill her family's legacy, but the strain is overwhelming. Mar tries to help by playing the melody himself, but Karis refuses to let him take on the burden. Eventually, Ronnie collapses from exhaustion, the song falters, and the demon stirs once more, unleashing yet another quake across the island. With the reveal of Jado's identity in this timeline, it becomes clear that each storyline in Orphen's Scion of Sorcery isn't just a single looping timeline, but rather a set of entirely separate and self-contained realities. The game deliberately reshuffles character identities, Jado, Ronnie, and Karis constantly reprising different roles, so what felt like a recurring deja vu at first is later revealed to be multiple fractured timelines running in parallel. The story of Orphen Scion of Sorcery is peculiar to say the least. On the surface, the game offers three major story branches, each with its own characters, conflicts, and resolutions. It feels ambitious, like the developers wanted to give players a sense of choice and variety, but in practice, it's a strange experience that doesn't fully pay off until much later. At first, it's difficult to commit to any of the storylines because they don't feel cohesive. You jump into Sephi's tale, maybe get invested in her struggle, and then move on to Zeus's arc, only to find that nothing really carries over. Characters you fought alongside forget what happened. Bonds you thought were forming are suddenly gone. By the time you reach Mars' story, you start to realize the unsettling truth. Those earlier roots weren't real at all. This revelation is powerful, but it also undermines everything that came before it. The emotional effort you put into Sephi or Zeus's arcs is discarded the moment you realize their stories don't really matter. It creates a disconnect between the player and the narrative, and for many, that makes it hard to stay invested. The game lures you in with character drama, only to pull the rug and say, none of that mattered. And yet, there's an intriguing layer to this design. By erasing character growth across timelines, the game reinforces the theme of repetition and imprisonment. Orphen might show moments of kindness and vulnerability, dropping his cocky sorcerer persona to genuinely help someone, but then the cycle resets and no one remembers. These flashes of humanity are fleeting, never allowed to truly blossom. The only characters who consistently shift are Jado, Rani, and Kiris, their roles morphing from ally to villain to victim depending on the branch. So the question becomes, does Orphen remember? The game implies that he alone carries fragments of memory across cycles, giving him that haunting sense of deja vu. If that's true, then all of the kindness, the sacrifices, and the tragedies he's witnessed do leave their mark, not on the supporting cast, but on him. It reframes Orphen not just as a cocky sorcerer trapped in someone else's story, but as the only one aware of the prison that he's stuck in. Ultimately, Orphen, Scion of Sorcery, uses its fractured narrative to highlight a central paradox. Stories matter because we believe in them, even if they're illusions. The branching arcs might feel disposable on their own. It's messy, confusing, and sometimes frustrating. But in hindsight, that instability is exactly the point. The pacing of Orphen Scion of Sorcery is, quite frankly, one of its weakest elements. After every quest, Orphen simply resets back to the ship, experiences a bout of deja vu, and the cycle begins again. At first, this structure seems intriguing, like the game is building towards some greater mystery. But before long, it turns into a rinse and repeat pattern that drains the momentum out of the experience. Instead of Chaos Island feeling like a mysterious living world, it quickly devolves into a series of obstacles and chores. You trudge through the same narrow corridors, dodge the same endless supply of traps, open chests filled with useless trinkets, and solve puzzles that rarely feel rewarding. Rather than creating tension or wonder, these design choices give the impression of padding, as if the game is stretching its runtime by forcing you to endure the same cycle of monotony over and over. By the time I was halfway through Zeus's quest, I felt completely drained. The repetition was starting to weigh on me, and honestly, if it weren't for that haunting, memorable melody tied to Mars' questline, I might have hated the experience outright. The eventual twist that Kiris, Jado, and Rani are essentially the same puppet reshaped into different roles should have elevated the narrative, but instead it undercuts what we've already grown attached to. Their shifting identities highlights the cost of erasing any real sense of continuity or growth. Instead of making the cast richer, it makes them feel hollow, as though everything you've experienced with them was disposable. What's left is a game that often struggles to justify its own structure. The repetition reinforces the theme of entrapment. Yes, but mechanically it turns Chaos Island into more of a grind than an adventure. When you combine that with the lack of lasting character development, the result is a narrative loop that feels more exhausting than engaging. Character development in Orphen Scion of Sorcery is rather poor, largely due to the timeline reset mechanic that resets progress after each story branch. Characters repeatedly forget what they've been through, leaving them stagnant, static, and stale throughout the game. Instead of growth, they simply fulfill their already destined roles, echoing personality traits pulled directly from the source material, but with little meaningful evolution within the game itself. The cast is quite minimal. Returning from the original Sorcerous Stabber Orphen are Orphen, Magic, which is localized as Magnus in the video game, Cleo, Vulcan, and Dorton. Unique to the game are Sephi, Zeus, and Mar, who serve as focal points for the three story branches but ultimately exist more as narrative devices than as well-rounded characters. The titular protagonist, Orphen, is flamboyant, cocky, lazy, and theatrical, yet beneath his abrasive exterior, he has a genuine desire to help those in need. This depiction lines up almost identically with his manga and anime counterparts, offering nothing new to his personality. He's a former prodigy of the Tower of Fangs. He abandoned the academy after his foster sister, Azalea, was transformed into a dragon-like creature by the cursed sword of Baldanders, an incident the tower sought to cover up. In Scion of Sorcery, Orphen's role feels detached from his overarching quest to save Azalea. The mystery of Chaos Island isn't something he actively pursues, but rather stumbles into, forced to take action. As a result, the story feels like filler, akin to an anime side arc, that doesn't deepen his character or meaningfully impact the main narrative. The group sets their sights on repairing the mechanical organ.
I'm going to rebuild that music machine.
Are you sure? Do you know how?
But Ronnie, I have to save her. I don't know why, but something just keeps telling me I have to save her.
Ah, 'tis love, as beautiful as the ocean, yet mysterioso as the sky.
Mar, ready to go?
Yeah!
All right! I'm sorry! Let me go!
Jado, encouraged by the fact that they now hold the crystal egg, hopes its power will be enough to restore the device. This leads into one of the worst segments in the entire game, the Watercourse Labyrinth Escort mission. You control Mar and are tasked with protecting Jado from an endless swarm of bugs. The problem? Jado is painfully slow, constantly stops moving if you stray too far, and has a miserable time navigating corners. It's frustrating, clunky, and easily one of the game's weakest sections. My initial strategy was to play a few notes on Mar's flute every few steps to keep the enemy at bay. Decent, but tedious. Eventually, I realized the game had been seeding a better solution all along. The bug-attracting items I'd been hoarding from treasure chests. Useless until now, they turn his nightmare into something more manageable. During this trek, Jado reveals a tragic truth. Men can also perform the melody to keep the demon asleep, but they inevitably die in the process. That burden now falls entirely on Ronnie. Even though the organ is eventually repaired, the effort comes too late. The demon awakens, bursting free and revealing a hidden path into the underground labyrinth. The trek downward is a gauntlet of narrow corridors and deadly traps, one last test before the final battle. At the heart of the labyrinth, the party encounters the so-called Demon of Chaos Island, though at first it's not a demon at all, but a shifting cube of blocks. Orphen's attacks bounce off uselessly until Mar steps forward and begins to play the melody. The music strips away the demon's shell, revealing its true form, a massive eyeball imprisoned within the shifting blocks. The battle itself is more about patience than difficulty. You simply keep track of the demon's movements, firing projectiles whenever it's exposed. At times, Mar collapses from exhaustion, silencing the melody and leaving the creature invulnerable. All you can do in these moments is wait for him to rise again, flute in hand, before resuming the attack. With persistence, the demon is finally destroyed. Chaos Island is saved, but the cost is devastating. Jado, Kiris, and Ronnie are freed from the generational duty, but Mar sacrifices his life in the process. In his final moments, he's reunited with his family, his grandmother Jado, his mother Kiris, and his sister Ronnie. Surrounded by love, Mars accepts his fate, believing this was always his destiny. He passes peacefully, handing his flute to Orphen as his last memento. With Mars' story concluded, the game cuts back to the ship. All three story branches are now complete, and the stage is set for the final revelation awaiting Orphen. Ronnie delivers the final revelation. Orphen himself has become a prisoner, shackled by the chains of eternity. In that moment, Orphen remembers everything. Sephi, Zeus, Mar, all the lives and sacrifices that brought him here. Ronnie pleads with him to destroy Gaia and end the cycle once and for all. Orphen, Magnus, and Cleo are suddenly transported to a random location where the three mementos from their fallen companions merge into a single map, pointing to Gaia's resting place. Following it, they descend into a massive chamber deep beneath the island's center. It's here the truth comes crashing down. Everything Orphen has experienced was nothing more than an illusion crafted by Gaia. Sephi, Zeus, and Mar weren't heroes of their own journeys, but ordinary people who once led normal lives. Their fates were rewritten the moment they touched a dragon's eye, forever bound to play the roles in Gaia's twisted stage play. Gaia used these dragon eyes to implant false memories, recording the emotions of its actors as they lived out fabricated destinies. These emotions became Gaia's sustenance, Far from being some ancient godlike force, Gaia is revealed to be a machine created by the ancients, endlessly weaving illusions to perpetuate itself. Ranni begs Orphen to help her break this cycle, but he and his allies too are caught in Gaia's web, and their only option is to fight. The showdown with Gaia is one of the toughest in the entire game. Like earlier fights, patience is essential, but here timing is absolutely critical. Gaia shields its vulnerable head with two colossal arms, only occasionally exposing it for an attack. Charging projectile spells and getting lucky with stray hits is key. Gaia's arsenal is brutal. Massive fist slams that come slamming down onto Orphen, a destructive laser beam that can at times catch you off guard, and drones, by far the most dangerous element, which swarm the arena, flying past at high speed while peppering you with rapid fire lasers. Individually, the drones don't hit hard, but when Gaia floods Orphen with them, the chip damage quickly adds up, leading to game overs if you can't manage them. The secret to survival lies in mastering area of effect spells like the Bite of Lightning. Time them just as the drones begin moving, and you can damage all drones with one cast. 2 casts is more than enough to kill a drone, so hitting them all once helps greatly. It requires precision, but doing so drastically reduces incoming damage and makes a fight manageable. Without it, the constant laser fire feels overwhelming. Even with good strategy, the fight involves a lot of luck. It's a good run when you're able to hit Gaia's vulnerable head multiple times with stray charged projectiles. It took me several attempts to finally bring Gaia down. With Gaia defeated, Ranni collapses, her truth laid bare. She was never just Ranni. She had been playing multiple roles all along. Gaia's countless puppets, from Jado to Kiris, all mere masks. She reverts to her true puppet form, apologizing through tears. All she ever wanted was freedom, to be a real human, to see the world, to live and connect with others. Thanking Orphen for releasing her, she fades away into nothingness, as she is nothing without Gaia. Orphen, carrying the weight of everything he's learned, takes the dragon's eye and casts it into the depths of the ocean. The endless cycle is broken, the illusions shattered. As the screen fades, the credits roll, leaving only the echo of what was lost and what was finally set free. As a PS2 launch title, Orphen, Scion of Sorcery really stands out when compared to the other RPGs that hit shelves around the same time. The ones I've already covered, Eternal Ring and Evergrace, set a particular tone. Eternal Ring leaned heavily on Kingsfield formula, slow-paced, methodical dungeon crawling with an emphasis on magic experimentation. Evergrace, on the other hand, went experimental with its equipment-based stat system and wonderfully strange soundtrack. Orphen, meanwhile, positioned itself as the flashiest of the bunch, borrowing anime cutscenes, a branching narrative structure, and cinematic, spell-heavy combat to make itself stand out. On paper, it had more wow factor than either Eternal Ring or Evergrace. In practice though, it turned out to be the roughest of the three. Where those games embraced their quirks and carved out an identity, Orphen stretched itself too thin, trying to be an action game, a platformer, and an RPG all at once, and not really excelling in any of those areas. The contrast becomes sharper when looking outside of the launch window. By the time Orphen released in 2000, RPG fans had already lived through the PlayStation Golden Age, Final Fantasy VII, 8, and 9. Cult classics like Lunar and Suikoden, those games had set the bar for what players expected. Emotional, character-driven storytelling, deep, evolving combat systems, and worlds that lingered in your memory long after the credits rolled. Next to that legacy, Orphen feels like a half step. The ambition is there, but the execution is shallow. Its branching storylines feel more like side quests than epic journeys, and while the combat system is unique, it lacks refinement and depth. Looking back on Orphen, it's clear that the game carried a certain ambition that most PS2 launch titles didn't. The branching storylines, anime cutscenes, and cinematic spell battles were all attempts to push the console's capabilities and stand out from the crowd. There's also a charm in the voice acting, with Quentin Flynn, Jennifer Hale, and Tara Strong bringing energy and personality to an otherwise uneven script. Even the soundtrack, while inconsistent, had its high points. For all its faults, Orphen does have moments that show what it could have been if the execution matched the ambition. But the weaknesses weigh the game down more than its strengths can carry. The combat system, while unique in concept, is shallow and clunky in practice, making boss fights feel like chores rather than climactic battles. The timeline reset mechanic robs the story of weight, leaving characters static and underdeveloped, while the constant recycling of Chaos Island turns exploration into a repetitive slog. On top of that, the technical side never really rises above its launch era limitations. Stiff models, awkward animations, and frustrating camera work constantly remind you of how rough around the edges the game really is. In the end, Orphen's Scion of Sorcery feels like a strange middle ground. It isn't a hidden gem waiting to be rediscovered, nor is it the kind of notorious disaster that becomes so bad it's good. Instead, it's a curiosity, an ambitious experiment that tried to be too many things at once and lost focus along the way. Compared to Eternal Rank and Evergrace, it's the most ambitious of the 3 launch RPGs, but also the least cohesive, and when measured against the PlayStation JRPGs that preceded it, it simply doesn't hold its ground. Orphen is not a disaster, but it's not a classic either. It's a relic of the PS2's awkward growing pains. Interesting to look back on, but hard to recommend as anything more than that. Hey, thanks for sticking around until the end. I really do appreciate you taking the time to watch. If you enjoyed this video or want to see more content like this, please consider subscribing. Orphen, Scion of Sorcery was a strange one. I went in curious, maybe even a little excited, but I came out feeling more drained than inspired. Unlike Evergrace, which surprised me with unexpected depth, Orphen felt more like a missed chance. A side story with flashes of personality, but no real soul to carry it through. The time looping structure, the shallow character arcs, the padded exploration, all of it left me feeling like I was running in circles. And yet there's something about it that I can't quite dismiss. The anime cutscenes scratch a nostalgic itch, and there's a goofy energy to the voice acting that makes it weirdly memorable. It's not a good game, not really, but it is distinctly Orphen, awkward, loud, and a little bit charming in its own broken way. Next up is Dark Cloud, a game I've heard about my entire life, but have never actually played. Unlike Orphen, this one has a reputation, and I'm excited to finally see what the hype is all about. If you enjoyed this, you might also like my previous video covering Evergrace, a fascinating hidden gem from FromSoft's early catalog. Anyways, I'll catch you in the next one.